The sun was barely rising when I first noticed Karen standing in my backyard with a clipboard in her hand. Her sunglasses covered half her face, but I could still see the smug smile tugging at her lips. She was pacing along the fence line, pointing and scribbling notes, as though she owned the place. I stepped outside with my coffee in hand and asked calmly what she was doing. She turned to me with that tone only Karen could manage, sharp, sweet, and full of arrogance. "Your fence is actually 3 feet onto HOA land," she announced. "Technically, this space belongs to us now." I nearly choked on my coffee. "This is my backyard," I told her firmly. "I bought this land with a house. I have the deed, the survey, the whole thing." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "The HOA board voted last night," she said, "and we have decided to reclaim this space." I laughed at the absurdity, but Karen's expression never changed. She was serious, dead serious. And to make things worse, she added, "I already promised the space to my friend for his new garden shed. So you might as well start moving your stuff." The nerve of this woman was unbelievable. But instead of arguing, I simply smiled and told her I would handle it. Karen smirked, thinking she had won, and strutted back toward her house, as if she were queen of the neighborhood. What she did not know was that I had already dealt with her kind before. I pulled out the survey maps, the property deed, and the legal documents showing the exact lines of my land. Every inch of that backyard was mine, without a shadow of doubt. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Karen wanted to push me out of my own space and hand it off to someone else, as if I did not matter. She thought I would roll over like the rest of the neighbors who feared the HOA board. But I had a better idea. If Karen wanted to play games with property lines, I was going to show her just how far those lines went. And she would not be laughing when I was done. I called a construction crew the very next morning. They arrived with trucks full of supplies and heavy equipment rumbling down the quiet street. Karen rushed outside in her robe, hair in rollers, demanding to know what was going on. I gave her the sweetest smile and said, "Just making improvements to my property." She narrowed her eyes, but she could not stop me because everything was perfectly legal. The crew began digging and laying the foundation right along the property line. Every thud of the hammer and buzz of the saw made Karen's face turn redder. She hovered nearby, trying to intimidate the workers, but they ignored her and kept building. By the afternoon, the frame of the wall was already towering over her front yard. Neighbors began gathering, curious about the sudden construction. Some whispered with excitement, while others chuckled, knowing exactly what was happening. Karen barked at them, saying it was against HOA rules, but no one paid her any mind. I stood proudly as the wall grew taller and sturdier each hour. Karen called the HOA president, begging them to intervene, but when he arrived, I showed him the property deed. His face fell as he realized I was well within my rights. The smug confidence Karen wore earlier drained from her face, replaced by panic. Day after day, the wall stretched farther until it wrapped around the sides of her house. Her once wide-open front yard now looked boxed in, with towering stone cutting off her view. Every time she stepped outside, she was met with cold brick, reminding her of her failed scheme. She tried yelling at me, threatening lawsuits, even called the police. But each time the officers checked the documents, they shook their heads and left. It was clear to everyone Karen had lost. Her arrogance had backfired in the most spectacular way. And as the last brick was laid, the neighborhood cheered quietly from their porches. They had all been victims of Karen's bullying before, and now they finally saw someone stand up to her. But I was not finished yet, because the wall was only the beginning of what I had planned for Karen. Karen stormed out of her front door one morning, shouting so loud that even the birds scattered from the trees. She stood with her fists on her hips, glaring at the new wall as if sheer anger could bring it down. "You cannot keep me trapped in here," she yelled across the yard, her voice cracking with frustration. But I only sipped my coffee calmly and told her, "Maybe next time you should not try to steal what does not belong to you." Her face turned beet red, and she ran back inside, slamming her door so hard the windows rattled. Within an hour, she was back outside, dragging a folding chair and sitting defiantly in her driveway, staring at the wall. She sat there for hours, muttering about rules and power and how she would make the HOA bend to her will. But the truth was becoming clear to everyone watching from their porches. Karen had finally lost. The wall made her house look like a fortress, but not the proud kind. It looked like she was shut inside her own prison. Her friends stopped visiting because they could not even park near her place without being boxed in. Packages piled up outside because delivery trucks could not reach her door. Slowly, the woman who once boasted about running the neighborhood was becoming isolated. I could see the embarrassment eating at her every time she peeked through the small gap in the bricks. She would scowl and retreat quickly when she noticed neighbors pointing and chuckling. The same neighbors she had fined for leaving trash cans out too long or for planting flowers she did not like. Now, they were enjoying the sight of her downfall. But my plan was not to humiliate her completely. It was to teach her a lesson she would never forget. And as I looked at that wall stretching high around her house, I knew it was only the first step in breaking her pride. Karen tried everything she could to fight back. She called emergency HOA meetings demanding the board force me to tear the wall down. But every time she tried, the other members reminded her that she had brought this on herself. She had pushed too far, and now no one wanted to defend her. She even went as far as hiring a lawyer. For weeks, she walked around bragging that her attorney would crush me in court. But when the day finally came, the judge looked over the property maps and documents and dismissed her case in less than 10 minutes. Karen stormed out of the courthouse fuming while I walked out calm with a quiet smile. Back at home, the wall stood taller than ever, solid and unshakable. Karen now had to live each day in its shadow. She grew bitter, snapping at anyone who passed by and yelling at children who laughed too loudly on the street. Her once commanding presence in the neighborhood was gone, replaced by ridicule. The neighbors began siding with me more openly. Some even came over with homemade pies and thanked me for standing up to her. They admitted they had been too scared to confront her themselves, but watching her lose gave them hope. Karen could no longer push people around without consequence. I noticed her garden start to wilt as weeks passed. Her once perfect lawn became patchy and unkempt. She no longer bothered to show off like before. The wall was a constant reminder that she had been beaten at her own game. But deep down, I knew Karen was stubborn. She would not give up without one last desperate move. And I was ready for it because I knew exactly how to turn her final attempt into her greatest regret yet. Karen's final attempt came late one night when I saw flashing lights pulling into the neighborhood. 2 police cars rolled up and officers stepped out while Karen marched toward them, waving her arms dramatically. She pointed at the wall, shouting about how I had trapped her in her own house and violated her rights. The officers listened patiently, but when they came to my door, I was ready. I handed them the same documents I had shown before. The deed, the survey, the permits, everything was in perfect order. One of the officers even chuckled under his breath as he looked at the papers. He turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, this wall is entirely legal. If anything, it looks like you have been harassing your neighbor." Karen's mouth dropped open. She sputtered, trying to argue, but the officers warned her that false claims could lead to consequences. For the first time, she fell completely silent, her face pale under the streetlights. When the police left, the neighbors who had been watching from their porches started whispering and laughing. Karen hurried back into her house, slamming the door behind her. But now everyone knew she had lost completely. The queen of the neighborhood had been stripped of her crown and locked inside a fortress of her own making. From that night forward, her voice no longer carried weight at HOA meetings. She still peeked out of her windows, sometimes glaring at the wall and muttering to herself. But every time I saw her, I could tell the fight was gone from her eyes. The woman who once thrived on control was now learning how it felt to live with none. And as I sipped my coffee each morning, staring at the wall that protected my backyard, I knew Karen had finally understood. Trying to claim what was never hers had cost her more than she could ever imagine. Weeks passed, and the wall became part of the neighborhood's landscape. Children rode their bikes along its base, laughing as their voices echoed off the stone. Neighbors planted flowers at its edges, turning it into something beautiful instead of a burden. Everyone except Karen seemed to appreciate it. She sat alone on her porch day after day, staring at the barrier like it was her enemy. Sometimes she muttered under her breath, sometimes she simply glared in silence. Her house no longer looked like the pride of the neighborhood, but like a cage she had built for herself through arrogance. One afternoon, I saw her standing by the edge of the wall, tracing her fingers along the bricks. She looked smaller, somehow her shoulders slumped, her confidence gone. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, but then she turned and stormed back inside before a word could be said. The other neighbors had started to gather at my place on weekends. We held cookouts, played music, and enjoyed ourselves without fear of being fined for noise or yard decorations. The laughter carried across the street, and I often caught Karen watching from behind her curtains, her face pale and expressionless as though she knew she had been left behind. It was strange to see the woman who once ruled the neighborhood reduced to silence. But I also knew Karen's pride would not allow her to admit defeat so easily. There was still a part of her searching for a way to claw back the control she had lost. And I had no doubt she would try again. Karen tried to claw her way back into power by showing up at the next HOA meeting dressed in her sharpest suit. She walked in with her chin high, pretending nothing had happened, and demanded to speak first. The room went quiet as everyone waited to hear what she would say. She launched into a speech about order and respect and how the neighborhood had fallen into chaos without her leadership. But the neighbors were no longer afraid of her. One by one, people spoke up against her, reminding her of all the fines she had given them for ridiculous reasons. Leaving a bicycle in the driveway, planting flowers she did not like, painting a door the wrong shade of beige. Her history of bullying poured out like water from a broken dam. Karen's voice shook as she tried to interrupt, but the flood of complaints drowned her out. The HOA president finally raised his hand and told her it was clear the community no longer trusted her. He announced that a vote would be held to remove her from the board entirely. For the first time ever, Karen had no words to fight back. When the vote came, nearly every hand in the room rose against her. Karen's face went pale as the reality hit. She was no longer in control, not of the HOA, not of the neighborhood, not even of her own reputation. She stormed out of the meeting without looking at anyone, but everyone could see the fury burning in her eyes. That night her house sat in darkness, no porch light, no movement, no sound. It was as if she had finally realized the empire she built on intimidation had crumbled. But I knew Karen well enough to understand this was not the end of her. She would keep searching for a way to make me pay. Karen disappeared from sight for a few days after the meeting. The neighborhood felt lighter, almost peaceful, without her constant shadow hanging over us. Children played freely in the street, neighbors chatted without whispering, and laughter carried into the evenings. But I knew her silence was not surrender, it was preparation. One evening I noticed her in the distance, walking along the edge of the wall with a measuring tape in her hand. She scribbled notes furiously in a notebook, muttering to herself as though she had discovered a flaw. I watched quietly from my porch, not saying a word. She was plotting something, that much was certain. Later that week, a stack of papers arrived in my mailbox. It was a letter signed by Karen herself, accusing me of violating obscure zoning codes and demanding I tear the wall down within 30 days. The papers looked official, but I could tell right away they were filled with errors. It was clear she had pieced them together herself, hoping to scare me. Instead of reacting, I took the papers straight to the county office. The clerk laughed softly, shaking his head, and told me they were worthless. When I asked if I should worry, he simply said not at all. It was nothing more than another one of Karen's games. I returned home to see her watching from her window, clearly waiting for me to panic. But when I held up the papers and tore them in half, right there in my driveway, her face twisted with rage. She slammed her curtain shut so hard it nearly fell from the rod. And I realized she was running out of tricks faster than she wanted to admit. The very next morning, Karen tried a new tactic. She marched right up to my porch with her arms crossed and a fake smile plastered on her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can come to some sort of agreement." I leaned against the doorframe, waiting for her to continue. She shifted uncomfortably before blurting out, "If you take down the wall, I will convince the HOA to let you expand your backyard patio." It was almost laughable watching her try to bargain with something she no longer had power over. I told her calmly that the wall was staying right where it was and reminded her that the HOA had already voted her out. Her fake smile vanished instantly, and her eyes narrowed into sharp little slits. "Fine," she snapped, "but do not say I did not give you a chance to avoid what is coming." She spun around on her heel and stormed back across the street, muttering under her breath. By afternoon, she was pacing her driveway on the phone, talking so loudly the entire block could hear. She bragged about calling in connections at the county office, about knowing inspectors who owed her favors. But every word only made the neighbors shake their heads. They had all heard these threats before, and no one took her seriously anymore. That night I sat on my porch watching the stars as the walls stood firm and unshakable. Karen thought she was hatching a master plan, but all she was really doing was digging herself deeper into a hole she could never climb out of. A week later, the final blow came not from me, but from the very people Karen thought she could control. The county inspector arrived after one of her endless complaints, but instead of siding with her, he walked straight past my wall and toward her property. He pointed out several violations she had ignored for years: cracked pavement, broken gutters, and even an unpermitted shed in her backyard. Karen tried to argue, but this time no one listened. The inspector handed her a list of fines that added up to thousands of dollars. Her face turned white as she realized the trap she had set for me had snapped shut on her instead. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By evening, everyone knew Karen had lost not just her power, but her standing in the community. She stopped showing her face outside altogether, curtains drawn tight, lights rarely on. The once loud voice of the neighborhood was gone. Meanwhile, the wall remained strong, a symbol of standing firm against her bullying. Neighbors often stopped by to thank me again, bringing over food or simply sharing a laugh about the peace that now filled the street. The neighborhood no longer lived under Karen's shadow, but under its own sense of freedom. As for Karen, her downfall became a quiet reminder to everyone. When arrogance tries to claim what is not theirs, it always ends the same. They lose everything while the truth stands tall like an unshakable wall.